Hello, everyone should have a wonderful Lag BaOmer. We have been discussing Heter Mechira, and we will continue to discuss Heter Mechira for a while. But we have established that Shmita in our times is a rabbinic obligation. Now, even if it is a rabbinic obligation, if a non-Jew purchases land in Eretz Israel, what is the nature of the things that are grown on that land? Is it exempt from the rules of Shmita, or is nonetheless it bound by the rules of Shmita? And we'll see that this is in fact a machlokas tanaim. In Gitin, Daf Mem Zayin Amud Aleph, the Mishnah says, "Hamokar Shadeu La'oved Kochavim," the one who sells his field to a non-Jew, and then Lוקח, someone else purchases that field. ומביא ממנו בכורים, the new purchaser brings from it the בכורים to the temple. מפני תיקון העולם, because of תיקון העולם. Because if we would say that he wouldn't have to bring trumas and maicers, he wouldn't have to separate trumas and maicers, he wouldn't bring בכורים. If he brings בכורים, he has to separate trumas and maicers. If he wouldn't do these things, people would say it's not really like owning land in Eretz Israel. I might as well buy land in Brooklyn or New York, Minnesota, wherever. It doesn't really matter. Wherever it is, I own the land. I own land. This land would be no different than anything else. So for Tikkun Olam, the Chachamim said that also from this land, you separate trumas maicers and you bring bikurim. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabba. Rabba says, Afal pi she'en kinyan l'oved kochovim בארץ ישראל להפקיע miyad מעשר. Even though when a non-Jew purchases land in Eretz Israel, owns land in Eretz Israel, it does not remove the obligation of separating trumas and maicers from that land. שנאמר, כי לי הארץ, because the pasuk says the land belongs to me, God says. Li kedusha's הארץ, to me is the sanctity of the land. It's sanctified to God. It doesn't matter anything else that is going on. Land is sanctified to God. Therefore, anything grown in Eretz Israel has to have trumas and maicers separated it. But nonetheless, the non-Jew, when he purchases land in Eretz Israel, he can dig cisterns in it, ditches, caves, whatever he wants. שנאמר, השמיים שמיים להשם, the heavens are God's, והארץ נתן לאדם, and he gave the earth to man to do with it what he wants. Nonetheless, Eretz Israel is sanctified, and according to Rabbah, you'd have to separate trumas and maicers from it no matter what. For Rabbi Elazar says, Af al pi sheyesh kinyan l'oved kochavim בארץ להפקיע מידי מעשר, even though the non-Jew has the ability when he owns the land to remove the obligation of trumas and maicers, שנאמר, it says degancha, your produce, v'lo degan oved kochavim, and not the produce of non-Jews. Nonetheless, he does not have the ability, when he purchases land in Eretz Israel, to dig in it cisterns, ditches, and caves. שנאמר, להשם הארץ, the land belongs to God. What is the essence of the machlokas between Rabbah and Rabbi Elazar? מעשר דגנך ולא דגן oved kochavim. One person says your produce and not the produce of a non-Jew. Umar savar diguncha, you're graining it. Velo digun oved kochavim, not the graining of the non-Jew. What does this mean? So Rashi says here, diguncha velo digun shel oved kochavim, that you grain it and not the non-Jew. Shim mirchan oved kochavim vehem shelo b'shas miruach. If the non-Jew takes the pile of grain and smooths it over, this is after winnowing, shugamar malachtan, this is the finishing of the work of the grain. The maaser, for purposes of maaser, this is the end, and that this is the point at which we determine whether there is a chiv of maaser on. Miruach oved kochavim potran, afilu lakhon misrael b'shibulin. The fact that the non-Jew did this Gemar Malacha, finished the work of the grain by making it into the nice pile, that even if he had bought it as stalks from a Jew, Nonetheless, since the Gemar Malacha, the finishing of the work of the grain, is in the hand of a non-Jew, it's exempt. Aval im higdilu bekarka ovid kochavim. But if the land grew, if the grain grew in the land of a non-Jew, v'lakhan Yisrael b'shibulin, and when they are stalks of grain just recently separated from the ground, the Jew buys them. Or mirchan, and he does the miruach, he smooths the pile of grain down after winnowing. Chayavim b'maiser, that's liable in tithe. De karkas Eretz Yisrael biyado v'kochavim lo hufka kedusha, because the land of Eretz Yisrael in the hands of a non-Jew doesn't remove its sanctity. This also occurs in Baba Metzia, Kuf Aleph Amud Aleph, in Menachos, Lamed Aleph Amud Aleph, Bechoros, Yud Aleph Amud Beis. People that want to look at it more can look at those places. Now, I'd like to move from here to the Rambam. The Rambam in Perek Aleph Halacha Yud of Hilchos Trumos says, Akum shekana karka be'eretz Yisrael lo hufka min hamitzvos. When a non-Jew purchases land in Eretz Yisrael, he has not removed it from the Mitzvos of Eretz Yisrael. Elahari he b'kedusha, but it still has its sanctity. Lefichach im chazer Yisrael v'lakho ממנו enu kikivush yachid. Therefore, when a Jew purchases it back from the non-Jew, it's not like an individual conquest of the land, which doesn't create sanctity there. Ela mafrish trumas meisers, but it's like it was conquered by the multitude, and therefore he has to separate trumas meisers from that, maybe bekworim, and he has to bring bekworim as well. They are called the Torah, and this is all from a Torah obligation. Ki'ilu lo nimkru la'akum me'olam, as if it were never sold to a non-Jew at all. V'yesh kinyan la'akum b'surya lahafki'a min ha'maisers. But in places where the sanctity of Eretz Israel is only to Rabbanan, in Syria, perhaps the Golan Heights, perhaps other areas, he does have the ability to remove the sanctity of the land, because the rabbis gave it sanctity. They gave Jewish-owned land in these areas sanctity, and therefore they did not give it when a non-Jew owns it. And so therefore, if a non-Jew purchases the land in Syria, he removes the obligation of Ma'aser, Shmita Shvis, and from Shmita, Kmoshi Yisbar, like we have explained. Now, in the next halacha, the Rambam says, halacha Yud Aleph, Perus Achum Shgadlu Bekarka Shekana Be'eretz Yisrael, produce that was grown by a non-Jew in land that he purchased in Eretz Yisrael. Im Nigmaru Malachtan Biyad Akum, if the work in them was finished in the hands of the non-Jew, Umircham Ha'akum, and the non-Jew did miruach, did smoothed out the piles of grain, or what if it were fruits, it could be other things, or the Gemar Malacha. It's discussed each one in its own place, what the finishing work is for each type of fruit and vegetable. Umikulam shenamar, degancha v'lo deganakum, and it says, your produce and not the produce of a non-Jew. V'im lakam Yisrael achar shenit lashu, and if a Jew purchases the non-Jewish produce after it's been separated from him, kodem shetikmar malachtan, before their work is finished, v'gamram Yisrael, and then the Jew finishes it, chayavim b'kol min Torah, he's obligated in everything from Torah law. Umafrish truma gedola, nos to the coin, and he separates truma gedola and he gives it to the coin. And this is the same pasak as is found in the Shulchan Aruch, the Yoredeh, Shin Lamed Aleph, Sif Gimel, and generally accepted this is the halacha, although this still leaves us with problems. And so it's not completely clear what the non-Jew is allowed to do on his land or not, or if the non-Jew owns land in Eretz Yisrael, on Shmita, what can he do it or not? This was a burning debate some 400 years ago in Tzfas between the Bibit and the Beis Yosef, according to them a bit, that there is no obligation in separating Trumas and Maasers during the Shmita year, because the Shmita year affects the land, whether it's non-Jewish land or Jewish land, it affects the land, and there is no Shmita cycle. The Beis Yosef disagreed, and this created a huge machlokas in Tzvas. Remember, the Beis Yosef was head of the Beis Din in Tzvas after Rabbeinu Yaakov Beirav, and the Mabit was also a chaver Beis Din of the Beis Din of the Beis Yosef. And as we will see when we look more into this machlokas between them, it got to the point where the Beis Yosef and the other Rabbanim and Tzvas actually put the Mabit in cherem. Having said this, and most poskim will seem to follow the Mabit, there are some like the Chazon Ish and Bnei Brak that follow the Mabit, not the Beis Yosef. So we have a very strong machlokus between them here. The Beis Yosef is saying it doesn't have Kedusha Shvis, therefore you have to separate Trumas and Maasers if Gemar Malacha was in Biyad Yisrael. And you have the Mabit saying it's not. In our next Shiur, we will look at this more carefully. We will go through what the Mabit writes. We will look at how the Beis Yosef responds to him, and we will examine their opinions in more depth. And hopefully this will give us some ideas as to whether selling land to a non-Jew, which according to Rabbi Eliezer would seem, we have the debates between Rabbah and Rabbi Eliezer, is one of them saying that the non-Jewish purchase of the land would end the sanctity of the land, as long as it's in the hands of the non-Jew, until a Jew purchases back. Whereas the other is saying, no, the sanctity still exists. If you say the sanctity still exists, then the rules of Shmita would still apply to the land, apparently. And if you, of course, say that there is no Kedusha when it's owned by the non-Jew, then the rules of Shmita should not apply to the land. Again, we will look more at this in the next year. Everyone should have a wonderful Lag Bomer. Bye-bye.